As we zoom in on this DNA, we can see that it's made up of nitrogen bases. There are two types of nitrogen bases, purines, which are adenine and guanine, and pyrimidines, which are cytosine, thymine, and uracil. Base pairing rules cause only adenine and thymine to pair and only guanine and cytosine to pair. Hydrogen bonds make sure of this because adenine and thymine are two hydrogen bonds, and guanine and cytosine have three hydrogen bonds. Let's take a closer look at the phosphate backbone. The phosphate backbone in this diagram is encased in blue arrows. The yellow circle are the ester bonds. At the 5' end, the phosphate group is connected to the DNA molecule, and at the 3' end, the DNA molecule is connected to the next phosphate group. DNA runs from the 5 to 3', as the DNA can only be synthesized by adding to the 3' end. Therefore, each strand is anti-parallel, pointing in opposite directions. Let's take a closer look at the DNA molecule prime location. At 1', the carbon attaches to the base. At 2', we can determine whether the molecule is DNA or RNA. DNA molecules have no oxygen, as shown in the image, whereas RNA will have an oxygen at the 2' location. At the 3 and 5' location, the phosphate group and the DNA molecule bond together. The phosphate groups have a negative charge and the bases have no charge. This causes the phosphate groups to be hydrophilic and the bases to be hydrophobic. In order to avoid interacting with water, the bases will stack on top of each other. This is called base stacking. Here we can see major and minor grooves. The major grooves have more space, which allows proteins to interact with the bases more. DNA can be left or right-handed. You can determine this by using your hands. If the strands at the bottom of the DNA are slanting the same way as your left or right thumb, the DNA is left or right-handed accordingly. The phosphate backbone of the DNA have a negative charge and as a result push away from each other. However, when high salt concentrations neutralize the negative charge, there is less repulsion between the strands, making it harder for them to break apart. This causes the temperature of the melting to rise, as it is now more difficult to break apart the strands. I've created a cartoon to demonstrate this. Mr. and Mrs. Phosphate Backbone are unhappily married. As a result, they want to get away from one another. The smallest fight could separate them. A Cupid sees this and is very sad. So he neutralizes all the anger that Mrs. and Mr. Phosphate Backbone have towards one another by sprinkling salt dust on them. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Phosphate's relationship is a lot stronger and will take a very big fight to separate them. Here are my references.